that life that meant for me. Things are moving so fast, even my shadow can follow me. Stuck in the same routine, I'm living out an empty dream. I'm still waiting for something, something to make me believe in. I don't really know where I should go. I don't think anybody does. Even in dark times, I'm hard to break. Through the noise and the flashing lights, I get lost in my mind. Anxiety never rests, so I hold my breath, hanging by a broken thread. Life's fading away. Always in a state of stalling, I feel like something's missing. There's no way to feel the
Well, this is new. Going live for the first time ever. I'm going to be honest, I was planning on doing this a different time, but today's rankings came out, and College Football Playoff Committee, I have words. I really do. I have lots of words. They have dug themselves into a hole all season. I think this is honestly the most inconsistent ranking committee we've ever seen. And that's literal and figurative, right? Like, the committee literally changed chairs this season, and also their rankings week to week have just been, I don't even know what to do with them. I don't. They're all over the place. They're not consistent within ranking week to week. They're not consistent week over week, right? Within the same rankings we have, oh, head-to-head really matters. Oh, strength of schedule matters. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's when you lose, not how you lose. It's, are you blowing teams out? Style points are a thing. It's all over the place as you go through the rankings. And yeah, I've got a lot of words, so I decided, you know what? We're going live. We're just gonna we're gonna go live here. We're gonna talk through it. We're gonna hopefully make some sense of this, and we're gonna talk about what needs to change. Because, I mean, it doesn't take long to scroll Twitter for you to figure out people are not happy with the current system and the rankings, and we're starting to see some holes. And you know, there were problems with the BCS. There were problems before the BCS when it was voted. There's problems with the 4-team playoff. Oh, what a surprise. There's problems with the 12-team. I do still think the 12-team is a much better system. Oh, boy, though. The committee has made some bad mistakes, and the concept and layout of college football right now with how the conferences are set up is a problem. So let's just get into this here. Yeah, if you haven't seen the rankings, let's go through this here. I'll be watching chat here today. Give me some pushback in chat. I'd love to see some arguments there. But Ohio State number 1, Indiana number 2, really the only 2 undefeated teams, so we're pretty fair there. Georgia number 3, okay. Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss, all right. Keep rolling. Okay, I'm gonna just stop right here because this is the crux of everybody's issue, right? This is where we're at. Let me move my camera. Sorry, there's gonna be a couple little things we're gonna have to probably do here. Let me make me a little bigger. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and we're going to move this over to the side a little, so you can see. And maybe we'll do this, actually. Apologies, first live stream here. I'm going to have to just make this a little bit. There we go. Okay. You're not going to be able to see the records unless I get a little smaller. There we go. All right, we're figuring these things out. Okay, so this is where we're going to sit, and we're just going to talk for a minute. Everybody take a deep breath. I know I needed to take a couple of deep breaths before coming on here. Okay, so big move here, right? That's kind of jumping out to everybody. Alabama jumps ahead of Notre Dame. And, same record. Alabama last week, if we go back to week 13, is ranked 10th. Okay. Committee's got them 10, BYU 11, Miami 12. All of these teams win. Okay. All of those teams win. The only team up here is Texas A&M that lost, right? And all of a sudden, Texas A&M drops to 7. Okay. I mean, honestly, that's probably fair. I'm not too upset by that. But all of a sudden, they swap Alabama and Notre Dame. What? Why? All right. Well, maybe Alabama played somebody really good, and it's just a big win for them. All right. Let's look. This is Alabama's schedule here. Okay. They beat Auburn, folks. Auburn is 5-7, and Auburn was right there with Alabama to the end here. Alabama goes for it on 4th down at the end of the game and gets the touchdown to go up and win. Right? That's how they won, folks. Okay. All right. Well, maybe Notre Dame looked terrible, right? Or maybe they had some major injury. First of all, there's no major injuries. Jeremiah Love, their star running back, was out for a moment with an apparent rib injury, but x-rays all came back negative. He even played again in that game. But he didn't have to because Notre Dame beat Stanford 49-20. 49-20. And you'll notice fourth quarter, Stanford scores 14 points. Notre Dame had backups in for the entire fourth quarter, right? They're not trying. It is true junk time moments, right? They were up, 42-6 going into that fourth quarter. They were fine, right? So Notre Dame blows out a 4-8 Stanford Cardinal team. Alabama barely beats a 5-7 Auburn team. And the committee decides, yeah, that's what we needed to see from Alabama. They're better than Notre Dame. What? What are you talking about? That is insane. Okay, now let's look at who else is below this Alabama team right now, right? Okay. An 11-1 BYU, whose only loss is to Texas Tech. Because here's my argument. Maybe they just decided, and this is the problem with this committee, maybe they decided when we're deciding between these teams in this area, it's about who you lost to. Who did you lose to and when, right? So by Texas A&M being beat, by that loss occurring, Notre Dame's losses don't look quite as good, right? They lost to the 7th-ranked team in the country instead of the 3rd-ranked team in the country. But if we're going by who you lost to, which would kind of explain the Notre Dame versus Miami argument, and in some ways the Texas over Vanderbilt argument, right? It's not about how many losses necessarily Texas has over Vanderbilt, right? It's who you lost to, right? Texas getting some credit for the Ohio State loss at the beginning of the year, right? You don't want to punish them too much for that. And we're going to get into the Texas stuff in a second. But then you look at BYU, and they break that trend. And this is where I come with this argument of The committee this year has been wildly inconsistent, both week to week, right? Last week, Alabama ranked lower than Notre Dame. This week, they're ranked higher. Why? They essentially beat teams with the similar records. Notre Dame up 42-6 at one point, and then a couple of junk time touchdowns with backups on the field. Alabama needs to go for it on fourth down at the end of the game to win it. It doesn't make sense. So week to week, they are inconsistent. But then even within a single week's rankings, they're once again inconsistent. Because if we're going by who you lost to, well, BYU and Oregon really have the best arguments there. Right? Because Oregon lost to Indiana and BYU lost to Texas Tech. So of these, one-loss teams, they have the best arguments. And Oregon gets ranked 5th for that. So again, start following the trend of like who's got the best loss. Oregon really has the best loss. Now, we're ranking Georgia, okay. We're ranking Texas Tech. Texas Tech, that you might say they actually have the best loss because the one loss they had, their quarterback didn't play. So that's, that's reasonable. But then all of a sudden, BYU, why is BYU down here? If we're separating teams by who you lost to and when, BYU, now they didn't lose pretty, but it was on the road at Texas Tech, who the committee obviously thinks is the 4th best team in the country. Why are they below Notre Dame? Notre Dame had 2 of the best losses. Maybe that's why they dropped them. But Alabama has a loss. If we look, I hate to break it to you, they lost to Florida State. And Florida State, not looking great. They're 6-6 now. They're 5-7 now, right? So Alabama doesn't fit that trend necessarily, and neither does BYU. But that's absolutely what's separating Notre Dame and Miami, because Miami beat Notre Dame head-to-head. It makes no sense. There's no consistency in those rankings. So, what does the committee need to do? What is the proper way to rank this? And now we're going to get into some maybe meta comments. And I'm going to cut up this live stream a little bit. I'm going to re-record a couple of these moments when we can have a little bit better organization from a thoughts perspective. Because there are a lot of different things at play here. First of all, this week, Alabama should not have passed Notre Dame. That just should not have happened. I'm sorry. There's no reason for that to have happened. If you don't have them pass Notre Dame, then, I think there's still some disagreements. I think BYU probably has an argument to go ahead. But that's an issue. Okay, that's probably the most glaring mistake this week, right? They've backed themselves into a corner with some of the Miami rankings. Going back to the first rankings, let's go back to those Week 10 rankings just for a moment so you can see the problem they had. They ranked Miami 18th in the country. And this is when I knew this committee was already starting to get off the rails. Miami was ranked 18th in the country. And for some reason, Utah was ranked 13th. We're looking at these rankings here. Louisville was ranked 15th. Virginia ranked 14th. As 8-1 teams. Louisville coming off of a win against Miami, right? That's a big win. And all of a sudden, Miami was ranked 18th, but Louisville was still ranked 15th as a one-loss team. Louisville wasn't even considered in here. Realistically, you look at them compared to a Notre Dame, common opponent. They beat Miami. And this is when I realized something about this year's committee. And I honestly, I have to say, I don't think this has happened before. I don't think this has been the case in previous years. This committee started ranking teams with kind of a projection mindset. I truly, honestly believe that this committee saw a Miami team that had just lost 2 games very recently, right? They're coming off of essentially 2 losses. I think they thought that Miami team was then going to continue losing games. And that's why they ranked them so low. And I think the reason a Louisville team is ranked down here and a Virginia team is ranked down here is I think they believed, yes, we know they're 8-1, but we're pretty confident they're going to lose more games. They were right, right? In certain cases, but they were wrong in another. And that started them on this path that has now backed them into a corner. Because by ranking Notre Dame 10 with 2 losses and Miami at 18th, that was too big of a gap, really, realistically, for Miami to ever recover. And I think it was based on the fact that I think the committee thought, they're going to lose more games. Right? They went very aggressively into the eye test. Why is Utah ranked 13 in the country here in these rankings? Doesn't really particularly make sense. Okay, let's go back to this week. So this week, because of the corner they backed themselves into, when you rank Miami that low compared to Notre Dame, unless Notre Dame loses another game, it's really hard for Miami to do anything with the rest of their schedule that proves that they're better than Notre Dame, right? If you think the gap is that big, 10-18, when they have the same record, a couple weeks ago, how is Miami supposed to prove that they're, 8-9 teams better without a loss from Notre Dame? If Notre Dame doesn't lose again, they're really at that moment. The Miami season is it. Like what are they supposed to do? Now they could have, if things had gone their way perfectly, it was quite difficult. They could have maybe made the ACC championship game, and that would have been a chance. I also think potentially the committee was, well, let's be honest, the committee really wishes Miami was in that ACC championship game, because a 7-5 Duke team could really mess up this whole bracket and cause some real chaos. And part of that's on the ACC because of their weird tiebreaker setups that a 7-5 team even is making the ACC championship game over a 10-2 Miami. But that's a different conversation. And I'll probably have to do that as a separate video because it's too deep of a topic to talk about. But the committee backed themselves into a corner and then decided to do this, which doesn't really make any sense. What if Miami running the table is impossible to do enough to pass a Notre Dame team as 10-2, the same record when Miami literally beat Notre Dame? Alabama has no right to do it. Not in that scenario. Okay, so that's probably the biggest issue with this week particular. We can go back at other weeks. We can talk about them. That's the problem for this week. Now, what does this actually set up from a bracket perspective? Okay. Ohio State, Indiana are going to play for the Big Ten championship. The loser of that is not getting dropped out of the playoff. So those two teams are in. Georgia is playing Alabama for the SEC championship. Ironically, none of these teams are, and they're all ranked ahead of Alabama, which is a little problematic for the committee, backing themselves into a corner once again and being wildly inconsistent. Alabama lost to Florida State. That's just that is a way worse loss than Notre Dame has. Way worse loss is they have two. BYU's got only one. And realistically, those are worse losses than Miami. So again, if we're separating the 10-2 teams by worst losses, which is how they separated Notre Dame and Miami, and to an extent Texas because of the Florida loss, then Alabama deserves not to be there. They just don't. So they backed themselves into a corner there. The loser of this game, the committee year over year. Now, this committee, like I said already, they're doing some interesting things. It seems like they're doing some things differently. But the committee hasn't, and I would argue should not, punish a team for losing their conference championship. We have automatic bids for a reason in conference championships, and I think that's actually a good thing. It means the conference championship means something. Now, we can get mad at the conferences for not setting up good conference championships at the ACC, but again, different video, different time. You can't punish Alabama and knock them out of the playoff for playing and losing to Georgia. If they do that, next season, there's going to be teams that opt out of their conference championship game. Right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that wouldn't work. I mean, they flipped Alabama Notre Dame when Notre Dame looked, won by a much bigger margin, won their game. They both win their game. They've got the same record one week to the next. Maybe they'll go back and rewatch the game tape and they'll flip them back next week without them playing. But realistically, come on. That's dumb. You can't punish Alabama and take them out of the playoff just because they made the SEC championship game and lose to Georgia. Obviously, if Alabama wins, it's not an argument, and they're not dropping Georgia from 3 in the country out of the playoff for losing the SEC championship game. You're not going to do that. SEC championship game, ACC championship game, Big Ten, whatever conference you're in, the championship game should be only a help. Okay? BYU, if you win your conference championship game, you should be able to go up. Texas Tech, in that case, would probably drop a few spots, but you can't remove them for the playoff. Okay, so Alabama's in. Georgia's in. We already said, obviously, Ohio State and Indiana. Now Texas Tech is playing BYU. BYU, you win that game, you're in. Now, if you lose that game, we're all sitting here and we're going, well, they're 11th, 12-team playoff. Should be basically the same argument as Alabama, right? They're in. Except for the fact that in these 12 teams, we got to scroll a little down here to 17th for Virginia is one member of the ACC championship game. And then we got to remember it's the top 5 ranked conference champions. Note, I did not say it is the 4 power conference champions plus 1 group of 5 conference champion. It is the 5 highest ranked conference champions regardless. This is something that historically we've missed because typically that means it's the Power Four and one group of five. But Virginia is playing Duke, who is 7-5 and not ranked in the top 25. If Duke wins, most likely we'd have the SEC champion, the Big Ten champion, the Big 12 champion, and then 2 group of 5 teams. Realistically, I believe that would be Tulane and James Madison if we're going by the rankings, because North Texas and Tulane are playing. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but essentially that's how it works. So Virginia, let's say everything goes along with the rankings. Virginia needs to get in this playoff. So all of a sudden you can come in here, move BYU down, move Miami down, move Notre Dame down, right? The teams that are not playing in, well, BYU if they lost, right? Because we're going with straight up by the rankings, those are who's going to win. Oregon's going to stay. They're not playing. Ole Miss, stay. Not playing. Texas A&M, stay, right? Oklahoma, stay. Again, this is where the committee has put them in position. Alabama's playing, but you can't drop them out of the playoff. And then we're down to these 3 teams, but 2 of those spots need to be taken up by conference champions. Because again, Big 12 conference champion is going to be one of those 2 teams. SEC champion, Big 10 champion. There needs to be 2 more conference champions in. So we have 3 teams here. 2 of them are getting bumped. And if BYU wins, uh-oh. 10, 11, 12, and 13, I guess, get bumped because BYU stays, right? And so that means Notre Dame and Miami are gone. BYU wins, for sure, Notre Dame and Miami are gone. If BYU loses, then you have these 3 teams, and you have 1 spot left. Realistically, I'm sorry. We'll talk about Texas probably tomorrow, because they're crying about losing Ohio State, and that's the reason. They're 9-3. If they were 10-2, they'd be in the playoff. I'm not actually so sure because of like what we're seeing here. But maybe they are. These 3 teams, there's only 1 spot. So 2 of them are getting bumped. So the committee has backed themselves into basically an impossible scenario. How do you drop Miami and BYU for Notre Dame? With how they've ranked it, that's how it's supposed to be. How do you, without Notre Dame or Miami playing the game, figure that out? Again, we're assuming BYU loses. If BYU wins, this gets, well, it's guaranteed Notre Dame and Miami don't get in. Honestly, I think the committee that would probably like BYU to win, because that simplifies everything. They don't have to deal with the Notre Dame-Miami debacle that they created for themselves by ranking Miami 18th and Notre Dame 10 in the original rankings when Miami beat Notre Dame and they had the same record. They're putting themselves in a bad position. BYU could save them in a way, because then Notre Dame and Miami, neither of them make the playoff. They move on with their lives, right? The committee just, it's pretty simple. BYU got in. We're not dropping Texas Tech out. Everybody else stays. We just slot in a couple of group of 5 teams or the group of 5 in the ACC champion. We move on with our lives. But this is really an unfortunate scenario. And what they should have done is rank all three of these teams above Oklahoma and Alabama. I'm just going to let you sit with that one for a minute. All three of those teams should have been ranked ahead of Oklahoma and Alabama. BYU has one loss. BYU should be grouped with the other one-loss teams from power conferences. I actually kind of liked the committee's idea of, hey, when we have these teams that are pretty close together, similar records, same records, we should look at teams, how they lost, when they lost, and who they lost to, and that be one of the deciding factors. Obviously, head-to-head needs to matter, but I could listen to the argument if they would have just stayed consistent of, yeah, Miami lost to two teams that are not that great, and they lost later in the season, whereas Notre Dame, well, they lost the first two games of the season with, let's be honest, a brand new starting freshman quarterback and a brand new defensive coordinator. And they lost those two games by a collective of 4 points. 4 total points in those two games. They didn't get blown out by anybody. Texas A&M game, the officials even admitted that the fourth down play that gave Texas A&M the win, they missed a very egregious hold, and, that could have gone differently. Also, Notre Dame in that game muffed the snap on an extra point, something they have never done at any other point this season. And they lost by 1 to Texas A&M. Miami deserves credit for that win, but I can get the argument of Notre Dame has shown they're a much better team now. They are, flat out. The quarterback's more experienced. The defense has greatly improved as the season has gone on. Miami, you lost 2 games later in the year to 2 worse teams than Notre Dame did. I can listen to that argument. I can. And say, hey, Notre Dame, Miami, the head-to-head means something. It doesn't mean everything. We're going to justify, hey, it's the first 2 games of the season. It was much later in the season. I can listen to that if they would have just stayed consistent. And if they do stay consistent with that, Miami should be ranked up here, right below Texas A&M if you really think so. Realistically, Texas A&M lost to Texas in the only good game they played this season besides the Notre Dame game. So Texas A&M's getting a lot of credit for winning the Notre Dame game by 1 point with a penalty and a muff snap and a kick and blah, 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 right? And Miami's not. Really bizarre. Just another inconsistency with this committee. BYU should be ranked up here next to Texas A&M. I would argue they should probably be ranked right behind Ole Miss ahead of Texas A&M. Because BYU realistically has just as many semi-quality wins, right? They have a win over Utah. And, again, they have a much less worse loss. Just frankly. Notre Dame, 2 losses. Alabama has a worse loss. Drop them. Oklahoma. We haven't actually looked at them, so let's do it. Those bowl games last year. They did beat Michigan. Let's go through. Here we go. Where did they lose? Well, they lost to Texas. So they have the same, worse loss as Texas A&M. And then they lost to Ole Miss. So those are 2 pretty good losses. Absolutely. And so I would say, sure, leave Oklahoma. They head-to-head, right? All of a sudden, head-to-head means something in Oklahoma and Alabama. But Oklahoma has maybe 2 less worse losses in their loss column, right? The teams they lose to Ole Miss, and they lose to Texas. But Notre Dame would have an argument that they actually have two better losses because they came early in the season and they came against Texas A&M and Miami, who again should be ranked significantly higher. So all of a sudden, Oklahoma has worse losses than Notre Dame does. Again, I already moved BYU up. Notre Dame has not as bad losses in that they were early in the season against Oklahoma and Alabama. At least this would have some consistency, committee. You'd be rewarding head-to-head and worse losses and when you lost consistently across your rankings instead of what you came up with here. Then you have Miami. Now, Miami doesn't have great losses. So in that argument, it would be difficult with them, with Oklahoma and Alabama, if we're going just purely based off of who you lost to and when. But, you know, Virginia is playing for the ACC championship game. They're 10-2. If we look at Miami here, again, that's the first start of the season. They lose to SMU and they lose to Louisville. Those aren't great, but they are close. SMU's overtime, that's by 3 points to Louisville. Now, that one's tough because it's at home, but, you know, okay. And they're kind of in the middle of the season. Realistically, Miami, Alabama, Oklahoma should be the argument if we're staying consistent over the course of the rankings. But we're not. So that's why I would say, and I would say, you know, Miami, a win over Notre Dame should mean something. We talk a lot about, it's supposed to be the 12 best teams. And this argument of best versus most deserving. Let's do a little thought experiment between these 5 teams. Is it possible, or maybe we should say, how likely do you think it is that Oklahoma is the best team in college football? Right now, today. Do we think Oklahoma might be the best team in college football? I would make an argument, probably not. Right? They're barely beaten LSU, barely beaten Missouri. They squeaked out a win over Alabama, which they deserve credit for. Tennessee, this one, I don't have time to talk about Tennessee. Tennessee hasn't beaten a team with a winning record. Like, come on. The reason they were ranked is absolutely atrocious. They got beat pretty badly by Ole Miss. We're pretty confident Ole Miss is better than them. And they got beat by Texas, right? Yeah, they handled Kent State, and they won against Auburn by 7. Okay. I'm fairly confident that Oklahoma's probably not the best team in the country. I think they're good, deserving of a good, fun bowl game. I'm going to enjoy watching them. But do we think Oklahoma realistically has a chance against any of these teams? Well, we saw Oklahoma play Ole Miss. It wasn't super competitive. Ole Miss beat them pretty good. Okay. So I'm not so sure Oklahoma's best team. It's possible. I'm not really sure it's possible. Alabama. Let's go back to their schedule. Here we go. Are they possibly the best team in the country? Look at this schedule. Okay. They started off with kind of a beatdown against Florida State, who was terrible. Okay, but it's first week of the season. You know, they're allowed to improve, and we're thinking, who are the best teams right now today? So it means something, not everything. They beat Georgia, which is pretty cool. Beat Vandy. I don't know. Okay. Beat Missouri by 3. All right. Okay. We're looking through here. They got beat by Oklahoma, who we just talked about. Probably not the best team in the country. And then they struggled against Auburn. Again, they need a fourth down play to score a touchdown at the end of the game. I'm going to make an argument that they might not be the best team in the country. If we think Oklahoma's probably not the best team in the country, Oklahoma and Alabama just played and Alabama lost to them. So, realistically, just like I said, Oklahoma versus Ole Miss, the likelihood that Oklahoma is actually the best team in the country is low because we're pretty confident Ole Miss is better than them. And Alabama, are they the best team in the country? They already played Oklahoma. And they lost. Well, they're probably not the best team in the country. All right, Notre Dame. Is it possible Notre Dame is the best team in the country? Well, they started off rough, right? 2 losses. Again, we already talked about it. 4 points, etc., etc. Then they kind of just beat down everybody. USC, I guess that's a 10-point game. But that's the closest game. And Navy is not a terrible team, right? If you look at rankings down here, Navy was ranked last week, I believe, and they're not ranked this week. But Navy's not a terrible team. But realistically, Notre Dame doesn't have any arguments over could they be the best team or over their best wins, big wins. They got to win over Pitt. They got to win over USC, win over Navy. But it's these blowouts that is kind of interesting. The Arkansas one, I think, is actually an underrated one that people aren't talking about because Arkansas kind of played everybody tough this year, including all those SEC teams, right? You look at an Arkansas team. Now, it was a little earlier in the season, but, lost to Texas A&M by 3, lost to LSU by 1. Texas, that game was actually pretty close towards the end, up until the end. Played Ole Miss to a 1-score game. They kind of played tight with everybody. That was the bowl game last year, so don't freak out about that. Notre Dame didn't play tight against Notre Dame. I mean, they fired their coach afterwards. It was such a bad loss, right? So you look at these rankings. Has Notre Dame actually played anybody that's ranked ahead of them? No. Have they beaten the pants off of everybody that they've played? Yes. Are there 2 losses, pretty good losses, and when early in the season? Yes. I think it is possible. I don't think it's likely. I don't think Notre Dame should be ranked number 1. I'm not saying that. But I think it's possible that Notre Dame might be the best team in the country. We really don't know because they've just blown out everybody they've played ever since week 3 on. It is possible Notre Dame is the best team in the country. BYU. It's the same thing. BYU, don't have the best schedule. Arizona was a tough game for them. But they still won. And you got to give them credit for winning. Their only loss is against Texas Tech on the road. And they're beating teams by pretty decent margin. Not quite Notre Dame margins. Right? They didn't beat anybody 70-7, but they didn't play Syracuse either. So, there you go. They got to win over Utah. Their only losses to Texas Tech on the road. 1 loss. Unlike Alabama and Oklahoma, who both have 2 losses. I think it is possible. Now, we're going to find out maybe in this Big 12 championship game if it's possible that they're the best team in the country. If they get smoked by Texas Tech, then it's probably, most likely so long BYU. You're probably not a possible contender for the best team in the country. Miami. They stumbled over the course of a couple weeks against Louisville and SMU. One of those games is overtime, so don't let the 6 points fool you, right? Overtime can make it, a bigger margin of victory. Or 3 against Louisville, and that was a last-second field goal as well. Then they've rolled at people. A Pitt team that's not too bad. And they beat Notre Dame, who, again, we just said Notre Dame might be the best team in the country. Now, Miami got them really early. We're talking about now. But it is possible, if you look at the teams ahead of Miami, they didn't lose to any of these teams. In fact, they beat one of them. I realistically think it's possible Miami is the best team in the country. So if we're really worried about that, that's just another argument for why these three teams should be ahead of Alabama and Oklahoma. We want to make sure, and this was the problem years and years ago, and this is why we've expanded the playoff to 12. When it was voted on, and they didn't even play a game, well, that's just endless debates of who's the best team in the country. And then it's whoever wins the debate, I guess, gets the championship. So that doesn't make sense. So then we went to the BCS, and we said, all right, we're going to let the computers do it, and we're actually going to play a game. But then we started to have the argument of sometimes that number 3 ranked team was really, really good. And we're not so sure whether it might be the best team in the country or not. So we said, you know what? We need a playoff. Not just one game, not computers where, halfway through the season, they're just statistically certain teams were out of it, even if they won all their games, right? You start the year, right? And this is where the group of 5 is like, hey, maybe consistently year over year, we're not the best team, but every once in a while, we put together a good team. There's a Boise State team that's really good. There's a Cincinnati team that's pretty good. I think we deserve to have a shot when those teams happen to be really good in a year, because they never get to play the big boys, and the big schools won't schedule them, and all of this stuff, right? UCF had that for a little while, although they ducked Florida, and I'll never forgive them for that. But that UCF team was essentially undefeated for multiple years. Boise State a few years ago, basically undefeated for multiple years. Maybe they were one of the best teams, or maybe they were the best team in the country. We will never know. So we started to have that argument, and we said, hey, we need a playoff. Okay, so now we're at 4 teams. Then we started to have the argument of, how about that 5th team? Now, many years, we were pretty confident, right, that the best team was probably one of the top 4 teams. But as NILs happened and transfer portal stuff, we're starting to wonder, and I think it'd be a reasonable argument to make this season, is Oregon maybe the best team in the country? Today, right? They lost to Indiana at home. That's a bad loss. But there's a little earlier in the season, right? They're a little different team. Ole Miss team. It's possible Ole Miss is the best team in the country. They might be. Texas A&M, after their loss to Texas, I think there's definitely a lot more doubters. But if you go back 1 week, and let's say Texas A&M beats Texas, which is possible, then you really would have an argument, because Texas Tech would have been the number 5 team. And their only loss was without their quarterback. So we went, okay, 4 is not enough. It is possible in a year that the rankings can work out in such a way that the 5th ranked team, maybe even the 6th or 7th ranked team, might be the best team in the country. So now we have 12. And I would make the argument, if you moved Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami in, and you dropped Oklahoma and Alabama, then threw in, because, again, conference championships need to mean something, and because we've made a requirement that the group of 5 gets in, regardless of their rank, I'm pretty confident you have the best team in the country in that playoff. I'm fairly confident the best team in the country is not Tulane, by the way. But we've said that 5 conference champions need to get in. Maybe we need to change that to 4. Or maybe we need to put some sort of requirement that says, hey, you got to be ranked at least in the top 15. Or, I mean, top 20, I guess Tulane gets there. But I honestly believe that the committee is putting Tulane here because they don't want to run into a situation where, it's a bunch of unranked teams in their playoff. Like, that would just look horrible, right? And so I think that's why they're moving Tulane up. I don't think the committee really believes that Tulane is the 20th best team in the country. I think they'd probably make an argument that Georgia Tech's better, maybe an argument that Houston's better. I don't know. Tulane? I don't know if the committee really believes that. I think Tulane, North Texas, James Madison, the committee's just ranking them here because there has to be at least two conference champions, like the two highest ranked conference champions. If they don't rank North Texas and James Madison and Duke wins, then you have Tulane win. Let's say Tulane's ranked and they don't rank these two teams. And then Duke wins, Tulane wins. Duke's unranked. James Madison's unranked. North Texas is unranked and just lost to Tulane. You literally don't have 5 ranked conference champions. They're not even there in the top 25. And that would be a disaster, right? Like, how do they do that? So I realistically, literally believe the committee went 20 through 25 and went, well, let's just play out the scenarios here. These teams have to be ranked. Otherwise, we're in just a disaster of a situation of who gets in, right, on Selection Sunday. So maybe make an argument. It'd probably be my strongest argument is you got to be ranked in the top 15 in order to get in as a conference champion. I would make the argument that Virginia, if they won the ACC, would be ranked in the top 15, and then they would get in, right? I don't think Tulane would. This season, it was a bad year for the group of 5, right? Everybody's got losses. I thought University of South Florida at the beginning of the year, when they rattled off a couple of wins, had a chance, but they've stumbled as things gone on. So it's just an unfortunate year for the group of 5 and for the committee. And I think there should be some protections. I do. And that would allow an Oklahoma or an Alabama, realistically, would be an Oklahoma because they beat Alabama head-to-head, because all of a sudden the committee cares about head-to-head, to get in. But even if that didn't happen and Tulane did get ranked in the top 15, you put Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami in. All 3 of those teams should be in the playoff. Alabama and Oklahoma should not. You'd be protected if you were the committee, if you did that. But instead, we have an absolute disaster. So, I mean, I'm going to leave this live stream up. Let me know in the comments on it what you think. How could we fix this? I think tomorrow I'm going to do a video on how to really fix the playoff. And I don't really think the answer is go to 16 teams. I don't think that's going to solve it. Because every bid that I've seen and proposal I've seen for 16 teams also involves a lot more like requirements for conference champions and certain conferences getting lots and lots of bids. And I don't think that solves the problem. So committee backed itself into a corner. It's going to be a rough weekend. It's going to be a rough weekend in college football. Let me know what you think. I'm going to leave this live stream up. We'll be posting a couple of videos. I was planning on doing this maybe a little later, getting this channel started back up, but appreciate you hanging out. Appreciate you hopping in. And yeah, I got more thoughts. We'll talk about how to fix the whole playoff thing tomorrow. But committee, what are we doing? Alabama over Notre Dame all of a sudden. Miami still not over Notre Dame. BYU down here at 11 with 1 loss to the number 4 team in the country. This makes no sense. These teams are ranked too high. I'm sorry. Drop them out. I get it. We think the SEC is good, but flipping Alabama and Notre Dame is just a disaster. I'm sorry. That was crazy. Alabama, go for it on 4th down and win the game. Notre Dame can't. I don't get it. I don't get it. They win 42-6 and then junk time a couple of touchdowns. Like, what are we worried about? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I'm at a loss for words. So let me know what your thoughts are down below, and we'll see you next time, I guess.